So yeah, thanks for taking time out of your evening and logging on. Okay, right, we'll get right into it because we've a good bit to go through. So this is the overview of the webinar. I'm going to look a little bit on culture and as the main theme of the webinar, and then I really want to get at the youth and adults and more practical elements. I do a good bit of CPD, and oftentimes a lot of it's very theoretical and there's not much elements you can take and use yourself. So I really want to kind of get into some practical examples. Culture, so this is the kind of boring stuff at the start. So a definition is the expression of a team's values, attitudes, beliefs about sports and competition. So within a club, within a youth section to a senior section, you have a lot of teams. So within a lot of teams, you can have a lot of individual cultures within that. So maybe the under 13 team is a nice fun team. The under 12 team might be a bit more serious, and so on and so forth. This is often dictated by the leaders in the group. So at the underage groups, it'll be the manager. As you get older, then it'll be more senior players, etc. And then all that's influenced by their backgrounds, personal beliefs, political beliefs, etc. But for tonight, we're just going to stay on the theme of physical culture. Obviously, it's part of performance as a whole. You have that quadrant of tactical, technical, mental, and physical. All of them are really important. I feel some are more important than others, and it's not physical. Teams that are very good tactically and technically have a huge advantage, even against teams who are quite good physically. Now that changes time to time, but it just differs team to team. This model here, so this guy here, John Shook, he's the first American to get a managerial role for Toyota, who are very big into culture and values and attitudes. Old models of kind of cultural and behavioral change used to look at changing your thinking. So it was really like a CBT or a cognitive behavioral therapy approach. So that whole, whatever you think, that'll change your behaviors. Whereas more modern thinking now is, change your behaviors and that'll change your thinking process. So behavior is essentially what all coaches do. We look to change behaviors within our athletes or modify them. I was at a talk one time, and a guy was asked about a definition of an S&C coach, and he gave the answer of a behavioral change specialist. Okay, behavioral change. So often what happens, and it's probably apt that this is in January, people look to make these massive changes. So say in January, they go from maybe 2 weeks of drinking and eating whatever over Christmas, and then they go to like 4 sessions a week in a gym. That lasts maybe 2 weeks, and then they fall off. Multiple reasons why. One is that change from their normal life to this new process that was too sudden, and they maybe don't have the support systems in place. Within a physical context, they're sore and have DOMs, which is a negative thing. So yeah, the best changes people can make are small incremental ones. Okay, right. So that's all the theoretical stuff, by the way. Getting into youth athlete. So this model on the right is from Bali. Some of you may have seen it before. It's on about peak height velocity between females and males. So if we look under chronological age, different people hit maturity at different times, and there's quite a range here. So if we look at the female model, the variance here could be maybe 2 years. Males obviously mature a little bit later, often around 14, but sometimes you'll get early maturers and late maturers. Now, it's been stated in the past that with these changes, there are windows of opportunity to introduce training. A study out last week actually refuted this and shows that there's no extra or no real windows of training adaptability based off your peak height velocity. So your peak height velocity, is how fast or the rate of growth at its fastest rate. So again, some athletes may get it when they're 12 years old, some may get it when they're 13, 14, 15. When athletes are going through a growth spurt, often what happens is their coordination skills go down. So if you're playing a sport like Gaelic or any kind of team sports, then that makes, skills that are once learned, like kicking, running, cutting, can be more challenging again. I have a golfer who recently hit his peak height velocity and his swing just completely went. His limb length got longer, his leg length got longer. So he has to relearn the skill component of his sport. And it can be quite a frustrating time for athletes because you feel like they're going a little bit backwards. Within a team's golf isn't too bad because it's quite a controlled environment. Within a team sport, if you have someone who has got through a sudden growth spurt, then they're in a team sport setting, which is often dictated by the other team. So your reaction times are less, and less reaction time and uncoordination don't go too well together. So it is something to be really cognizant of and aware of, and maybe be aware of your athlete's frustrations. And oftentimes, if you can explain this to the athlete, it eases their mind. So that's on the chronological age and the biological age. Chronological age is athletes who, that's how many days and years they've been alive. Biological age is, are they prepubescent or post? And based on that, then you'll have athletes at different different levels. So it's been stated that if you look at these, then you can modify your training. Now, within a setting of maybe you have 20 or 30 kids, that can be quite challenging because it's really difficult to modify for a large group, especially kids. So I've actually never seen it happen in person. People may correct me, but it is really difficult to change it, especially if you have a games-based model. It's something to be aware of. But what I feel is a more solid approach would be looking at an athlete's movement age. So what is their competency there and then? And when we talk about movement, here essentially it's the fundamental movement patterns. Calvin Giles is an Australian high performance coach. So he's been lecturing on this topic for, I think, about 40 years. He's given workshops at Sports Ireland and IRFU. And he essentially preaches these movement patterns to supplement the physical development of athletes across nearly every sport. Now, I would even use these for adults and then use variations of them. But essentially, if you're a youth coach and to supplement your sports training, you have these fundamental movements in, you have most bases covered. Now, within a games-based approach, the three areas on the red, the catch, throw, and kick, we often do get these. It's the core patterns on the left, the ones in the black, they're the more physically dominant ones. Okay, so you're a youth coach, you have an under 11s team, you want to introduce strength conditioning protocols to them, but you're not sure what you're doing. You don't want to do anything that may hurt the person or the athletes in front of you. You're not sure should you be doing S&C with these athletes. There's a few options. Okay, one is this idea of microdosing physical qualities throughout a session. So, there's many opportunities within even an hour session to get S&C in subtle ways. Microdosing is essentially putting in little time periods throughout the session of 3 to 5 minute blocks. So maybe you have your warm up done, and then you're into your drill. After that drill, you can get in this mini block of S&C, and then you go on to your game one, do that for 10 or 15 minutes, go on to your next mini block of S&C, go on to your next game, go on to your next mini block of S&C. So, you know, over the course of a session, you might get 15 minutes in a real subtle way. Now, some of the pros of that is you're not doing these dedicated blocks of S&C where athletes' form may break down through to acute fatigue or fatigue. You know, if you're doing something for 20, 30 minutes with youth athletes, their form may break down. If you have these little mini blocks, that's less likely to happen. From a coaching perspective also, you know, once the athletes get competent in maybe this format, then you can tell them to go, you know, do their 3 exercises for 20 seconds in each and do that 5 times, whereas you're setting up the next drill. So it can make sessions go quite smoothly in that way. Looking at the first one, so the mini block A, there's 3 exercises. So you have a squat hold, a plank hold, and a glute bridge. So within those 3 movements, you have a quad dominant movement or one for legs. You have a core stabilization exercise, and then you have a glute bridge, which is like your hamstrings and your glutes. You could do them for 20 seconds each and do that 5 times. The next mini block, then you can go for single leg movements. So you have a lunge hold in your left leg. You have a hollow flutter. Don't worry too much about the names. I have a list of these afterwards, and you can Google them. That's a core exercise, and then you have a lunge hold on your right. So now we've 6 S&C movements done, and then on your last block, then we have a different 3 movements. So even within a session, you know, you might get 9 different movements done in a real subtle way with your athletes. Okay, so here is an example of what I'm talking about with kind of youth athletes training. I would use an approach from a guy called Joe Ken. It's called Block Zero. So it's all like fundamental movements done kind of isometrically or done for holds. Let's get this going. Okay. Okay, not sure if you can hear this. So this guy is going to go for a split squat. Okay, so this is a split squat. Hold, and imagine now you've 15, 20 athletes in front of you, and you say go for a split squat hold, and you're timing it for 20 seconds. Now, the nice thing for the novice coach or the coach who has no experience with S&C is it's really easy to fix and correct from this position. It's really difficult for dynamic movements to kind of fix on the spot, especially with large groups. So this way, you can demo or get one of the kids to demo, and then they're looking around and they can actually self-correct themselves as well. So do that for about 20 seconds, and then you can move on to a different movement. So this guy's going to do a mid push-up hold. Okay, so again, this is a hold. These are quite challenging, and again, the kids can look at each other, they can self-correct. And it's just a really nice way of getting subtle S&C in. Okay, and now we'll go on to another movement. So this is a prone hold. Okay, so this is a hamstring movement. So again, he's doing an isometric hold. Okay, so let's get out of this. Okay, so just before we move on, within a session, you can train the entire body, and after a few weeks, the athletes will notice changes, it'll feel easier for them. And then you can go on to your progression. So that's the first option of microdosing. The second option is to have a standalone session, which is here. Okay, so this is again a block 0 program. If we look up at the top left-hand side, it says day 1. And then we have a couple of different movements here. So we have an isometric squat, an isometric push-up hold, an isometric lunge, and an isometric front squat. So if we do this 3 times throughout the session, the first time you could do it for 20 seconds, the second time around 25 seconds, and the third time around 30 seconds. That's the first part. Then you do 3 sets there, go on to your next set of exercises. So we've gone from a squat or a quad dominant movement. We're now on to a back of the body or a glute and hamstring movement, which is really important for Gaelic games. And then same concept then. Get through those 4 exercises, and then you can go on to your next set of exercises. You can see this is based off an American model with the quarters, so that's how they split it up with their athletes. So the last here in the bottom left is a side bridge with hip abduction. Again, don't worry too much about the exercises just yet. Shoulder taps and Cossack squats. So again, we have a kind of hip/core movement. We have an upper body stability movement. And then we have a single leg lower body movement. And again, same format throughout. So what I've done in the past with teams, especially youth teams, and by youth teams, I mean, under 12 up to under 17, under 18, is I will show them these exercises. They can record me doing them. And this might be a session that they do at home. So maybe they get 2 pitch sessions a week or 3. This might be a supplemental session. Now, initially, what I do is have it throughout the session. So I'm getting eyes on the athletes doing it. So they have it monitored. As they get competent at it, then this can be a session they can do at home. Now, all of these movements actually are body weight, and no equipment is needed. So that is day 1. You have day 2 up here. Where can I minimize this? Day 2 is here. So again, they're all different movements. And again, the same format throughout. So maybe we do this week 1, we do this week 2, we do this week 3, and then we rotate back. Again, the last day then are just all different movements. These are all derived from those fundamental movements: the squat, pull, brace, hit, push, pull. It provides a nice holistic stimulus for the athlete. Down at the very bottom then, these are kind of prehab exercises, Nordic curls and groin planks. I'll touch on those a little bit once we move on to the senior section. So again, just to recap this section, we can have microdosing within your training session, little bouts of 3 to 5 minutes. And then this can be a standalone that they do at home. Okay. So, right. Why should we do this for our youth athletes? So, training recently, or in the last couple of years, has gone very game-based, which has its pros. So this is called gamification. So everything is a game. The pros of this is there's a lot of transfer. So maybe you're doing a possession game, or maybe you're playing tag. Maybe it's a basketball variation. The concepts of the sport are often the same. It's kind of create and exploit space. So everything is 100 miles an hour. And again, transfer, and ultimately we train to try and get transfer to our sport, should mimic what we're trying to do in sport. So again, you could be playing basketball with youth athletes, and some of the same concepts apply to Gaelic games. So that's what we call by game speed. It's kind of 100 miles an hour. One of the other benefits of everything being kind of game-based is perception-action coupling. So, when we talk about agility, there's a difference between change direction and agility. Change direction is very set. So you tell an athlete run from cone A to cone B to cone C. Perception, agility then is more reactive. So you're saying 1v1 tag, so they're reacting to an opponent, or 1v1 tackling. Now, change direction is still good. I still use change direction, even though it's kind of gone out of flavor, because to a certain degree, I still use it because you get athletes, you know what volumes they've done in different directions. At the start of the season, I don't want any chaotic kind of game-based environments because they're coming back from a layoff. So say now with obviously restrictions and teams will be coming back in with a layoff for a while, I'll be doing more change of direction and then gradually transitioning into more like agility based. One of the other pros as well, and this is probably the main thing, is it's good fun playing game-based activities. Now, some of the cons of gamification or a purely games-based approach is there's small velocity variability. So don't worry too much about the name there. It just means everything's done at 100 miles an hour. And then small range of motion variability. So within most evasion sports like Gaelic, there is certain movements like cuts, decelerations, plants, etc. If everything's just game-based, it's very kind of upright. There's maybe a little bit of, there's more aimed at kind of the coaches watching, little hip movement, etc. So we lose out a little bit there. Okay, so again, any who've kind of done like sports science backgrounds will be familiar with this. If we look at the bottom right corner, this is a force velocity profile. Muscle actions, like for the most part, there's some differences, can be categorized into force, as in like tractor kind of speed or maximal strength, or velocity, how speedy something's done. So if we look at sport from a purely physical point of view, so not considering skill and mental benefits, etc., then it's a very speed oriented endeavor. So everything is done at this bottom right hand of the curve, and that's great. The higher level athletes have better speed, but what we don't get is this variability. We don't get this exposure through other muscle actions then. So what happens then is we become really good here, and then we lack other elements here. The better teams are good at both. So very fast, very strong, and very powerful. Okay, so this is from Mike Robertson. I think he derived it from Robbie Burke, who's actually based in Dublin, and Al Vermeil. This essentially is physical training. This is a hierarchy of physical training. Don't get too caught up in it as well for kind of people who are new to physical training. Essentially, you can break this down and most sports into mobility, strength work, and conditioning. These are all just sub-components of all that. Now, we have this arrow coming across at the top. With a purely games-based approach, we hit these top three sections. So speed, elastic strength, maybe some elements of explosive strength within a games-based approach. So you have a training session. We have game 1, game 2, game 3, game 4. We do that week after week, month after month. We get really good here, but we're not developing these fundamental qualities down here. So again, the negative sides of that is we get good here, not so good here. There's an increased likelihood of injury, and with injury, obviously you're out of the sessions. From a performance point of view, if the teams who have athletes who don't complete many sessions typically don't win. That's one element to it. From a youth perspective, it's not much fun being out injured. So our job as coaches is to try and develop this whole gambit of physical development. Okay, so an under 12 player to a senior level. So like if we go with this microdosing approach, there could be an average of 675 sessions throughout a youth athlete's kind of journey from under 12 to senior level. Now, if we go with this microdosing approach, we might be able to get 15 minutes blocks throughout those sessions, and that really adds up to over 10,000 minutes of pure physical development. Now, if say we don't address physical development, those athletes, you're really doing a disservice to them, in my opinion, because they're only getting this minimal exposure. They're really good at their sport, but not great athletes. They're really good at their sport, but maybe not healthy, because they'll start picking up injuries. The biggest predictor of an injury is a previous injury. So the more interventions we can do to minimize the risk or minimize the likelihood, the better it is for that athlete. No S&C program or no rehabilitation or prehabilitation program will completely mitigate the risk of injury. It just reduces the likelihood. So just be aware of that. So yeah, how we broke that down was 3 sessions a week. Maybe you do 35 to 40 weeks a year, 105 to 120 sessions potentially. So 2 of them might be at home, or 2 of them might be on the pitch, 1 might be at home. And then, we might get, 600 to 700 sessions before they're even a senior player. So, and then couple that with, PE and then playing other sports. It's a lot of training sessions. So even making small changes, these all really add up. On that too, don't be afraid to slow cook the athlete. We're going to look at some progressions of exercises, but they have a lot of sessions. 600 to 700 sessions maybe before they're a senior player is a lot of sessions. Now it does go in quickly, but we can take our time, get really competent at basic exercises, and then we can get on to our progressions. Okay, so the transition player, this is a subgroup I wanted to touch on. I think they often get neglected and they kind of fall down the rabbit hole a little bit. Transition player might be a 17, 18-year-old, so they're just coming out of youth. They're going on to senior level. Often we see a lot of injuries at this stage. It's quite a vulnerable age because they're highly motivated. Well, some are within a team setting. So they're a motivated athlete, but they're vulnerable from the sense that their training age is lower than the senior players. So what happens is if they go into a senior setup from a youth setup, there's this big disparity in speed of training, volume of training, frequency of training, then their training load's lower. And once you go into this acute spike, they're more likely to pick up a soft tissue injury. I see so many injuries at that 17 to 19-year-old age group because you have this motivated guy who wants to show the senior manager and the senior players that they're up to it. Maybe you have an environment where the senior guy thinks, right, this guy's young and fit. I'm gonna test them out, see what they're about. They can do all the runs. Usually these guys win all the running sessions at the start because they've no concept of pace themselves. And then lo and behold, a few weeks into the season, they've picked up some soft tissue injuries, and then that can snowball. And they can't get training in then, so they miss elements of preseason, and then they won't get game time, and then eventually they fall out of the sport. So it's a really pivotal age for you as a leader or you as a manager to look after those athletes. So even if they are showing up really well in your sessions, in your games, in your conditioning, err on the side of caution for these guys, because they're not fully developed yet, and they've all these other pressures going on in their life. You know, socially, maybe they're starting college, they're experiencing college a little bit. Also, this is something I feel quite strongly on. Also, my thesis about 11 years ago was done on the transitional phase between age grade and senior level rugby. Kind of what we found was that the players in positions of high cognitive load, or players that have to make decisions. So in Gaelic, that may be your goalkeeper, free taker, maybe your playmaker. They increase significant pre-performance anxiety when they transitioned from underage to senior level. So we tested them when they were underage. We had like their baseline pre-performance anxiety. Then a year later, we tested them at senior level, and all the players' anxiety increased, and then especially the players that had maybe more central roles within a team. So again, it's just something to be aware of as you as a coach, from a youth perspective, preparing your athlete to go into senior, and then from senior perspective, preparing your sessions for these youth athletes coming in. An approach from the AFL, this guy Tim Gabbett. So what they do there is they manage players in and out of their career. So what he means by that is they have a 17, 18, 19-year-old. They will do about 85 to 90% of the training load that the senior athletes do. And likewise with actually the guys at the end of their career, so the guys who've maybe 1 or 2 years left, maybe the 34-year-olds, 35-year-olds, Gaelic, maybe a wee bit older. So they just manage those guys' training load. Now, what does that mean from a practical perspective? Obviously, AFL, they've GPS and lots of monitoring systems, which we don't, inter-county teams have them, but a lot of club teams don't. So what you can do for a transitional athlete is maybe cut one run off, maybe a training block, or maybe the last set of runs, just pulling back on it. That can be a difficult conversation, especially with a motivated player. So I think as long as communication's good and you explain the rationale behind maybe why you're making these decisions, it's for the best interest of the player. Okay, so moving on to senior athletes. Okay, so I touched on this a little bit before on the, we've all kind of seen this model before of sports performance, broken up into technical, tactical, social, psychological, and physical. Sometimes, so this is me with my S&C lens on. Sometimes, S&C can be quite straightforward in some sense that, we try and get our guys stronger, fitter, faster, and there's an objective and quantifiable element to that. But sport is so multifaceted. Winning and losing is multifaceted as well. So, sometimes you could over-focus on one of these areas. So, as a physical development coach, you could be doing a lot of really good stuff, but the athletes technically is only is quite low. I tend to look at sports kind of a little bit this way. So if we were to give each section maybe 100%, some players are at different levels within those four areas. So you could be spending a lot of time in their physical development, but for that athlete to get better, they should probably be working on more ball work and more tactical work. So knowing the role of physical development within the wider spectrum of sports performance is really important, especially at senior level. So that's one athlete. So this is the physically really good athlete. They're fit, strong, powerful, but not a great player. Tactically not too good. This athlete is technically really, really good, not that fit. We've all seen players like this. I was in a meeting one time. a GPS report went up from the previous match. So the team average was 9.5 kilometers. A few guys got like 11. This is years ago when they used to just look at the volume. Now there's way more metrics you can look at. But one guy in the team hit 6.3 kilometers, so he's about 3 kilometers less than the team average, and it was highlighted at the meeting. So there's 40 of us in this room. Manager got up and said, like, yada yada yada, why did you hit 6 kilometers? And the player just said, but I scored 1-4, and he pretty much won us the game. And I got a good laugh, and the manager had to laugh as well because he knew it was right. So again, physical development is only part of it, and I think that's really important for S&C coaches to know that there's a bigger picture. Now, ideally, we have all of these different elements brought up. That's the goal. But you need to know your athletes and look at what their roles are within the wider context of the team. So within that, then for senior athletes, and this goes back to behavioral change, is having key performance indicators. So often I look at senior athletes, and this is this is like my filter for looking at things, is what is their individual needs. So maybe you have a guy in his late 30s, he has 3 kids, maybe 2 of them are under 3 years old, they're up all night. Will I treat him differently than a 19-year-old athlete who lives at home, doesn't work, doesn't have rent to pay for? I probably would treat him different. Often the downside for team sports is the individual gets lost. Now, team sports are fantastic. People can get a different level out of being involved with a group, but sometimes individual needs are kind of washed over. So when I do assessments with athletes, I kind of look at those factors. So what their home factors are, what their work life is, what their maybe they're doing a master's, and then I go on to what their athlete and health needs are. So that athlete and health needs would be going back to our movement patterns. Is can they do this? Can they lunge? Can they squat? Can they do push-ups? What their bracing strategies are like, what their running's like, what their catching's like. And then we look at their sport-specific needs. That's your technical, tactical kind of elements. So, are they good at following a game plan? Can they put the ball into a certain area? What is their range of kicking abilities? What's the areas they need to work on? So at the core of it is a very individual, athlete-oriented model. Then we look at the athlete, and then we look at the sport-specific needs. This is from an S&C perspective. Now, just be aware of that. Okay, so this is a program for a senior athlete. It was actually for a runner. I used this in a presentation a few weeks ago. Don't get caught up in all these names for use who are unfamiliar. Essentially, it's what Calvin Giles said of squat, pull, push, lunge, brace. That's essentially it. If we look at session A and the A1 exercise, we have our squat variation. Then we have a core variation underneath. So again, this is for a senior athlete. And then we have an upper body exercise. These exercises in brackets, I have these as filler exercises or in between exercises. So typically I'll put in low volume movements here, just so we build up our training volume. So what this would look like is an athlete does a goblet squat, they do 1 to 2 chin-ups, they do a dead bug, they do 1 to 2 chin-ups, they do a one arm, this is an overhead press, 1 to 2 chin-ups, and then back, do that 4 times each, and they're on to their B series. So here we have our quad dominant movement, and then down here for the B1 is a hamstring movement. Then we have this one arms farmer's carry, which is a brace movement, and then Our B3 is a horizontal pull or a back movement. The A3 is a shoulder movement. So within these 6 movements, within these 6 exercises, we've had 6 different movements. So we're not getting, again, any acute fatigue, and we get this kind of whole body stimulus. Here then on the C series, this is some kind of more sport specific stuff. So we have a groin movement, we have rotation in C2, and then we have some isolation work with a bent knee calf. So again, the whole idea here is to provide a whole body athletic stimulus for the athlete. Prehab then, so going back to our, individual needs and athlete needs, this is where you can kind of differentiate. Now, within saying that, when you're writing programs for senior athletes, you can look at the sport and look at where the biggest injury, or what are the main injuries within that sport. So often with field sports, it's going to be, hamstring, groin, calf, maybe hip flexor. So based off that, then everyone will get prehab or prehabilitation towards those. And again, the idea is to minimize the risk. You won't completely get rid of it, but we're doing movements that we know decreases the likelihood of injury. Again, from an individual point of view, maybe someone has this, maybe someone had a fall at work, or the operation. You can fit in their individual needs here. And then this A1 to C3 series then is just general athletic preparation based on where they're at. So I've been really conscious of saying a squat pattern and a core pattern and upper body pattern. The movements, again, they don't matter too much. It's where the person is currently at. So a goblet squat, I would have as a fairly standard squat pattern. Some athletes will be doing a squat here, but it'll be a more advanced version. Maybe they're doing a back squat, or like a safety squat bar squat. The primary thing is getting these movements in and having that the loading is stimulus to the athlete. Now, if we go on to the second session, essentially the second session is what we didn't get done in the first session. So these were all contrasting. So if you look at the A1 on the session A, it's a squat pattern. On the B, it's a hamstring pattern. On the A3, it's an overhead press. On the A3 on the B section, it's a horizontal row or a pull. So again, within the second session, you're just touching on the elements that the athlete hasn't really touched in that week. This would be a fairly simple S&C program, but simple is good. Simple works. This is a second program, so these are all progressions. So if we go back on our A1, we have a goblet squat. The next phase, so maybe this is 4 to 6 weeks later, we have another squat. It's just a variation. If we go back, our A1 with our session B is a hamstring movement. Our second phase is another hamstring movement. It's just a variation. It's a barbell movement. So again, the whole idea here is we get all these movements in to create the stimulus to be an athlete. And this will aid their sport because they're more robust, less likely of injury. Helps their speed, helps their acceleration. And then at the bottom, our prehab is just trying to mitigate the risks that they do by being an athlete. Okay, so this is part of a list of movements I have, going from kind of basic and progressing as it goes down. So if we look at the top left, the squat pattern, bilateral just means double leg or double limb. We have an assisted squat. So going on to a goblet squat, front squat, safety squat, and then back squat, supermax squat. This is a basic progression scheme. You may have program squats for your athlete. Again, this is senior level. and athletes may be at different competency levels of these key movements. If we look below unilateral or single limb, again, these are just progression schemes. So we go from the basic movements, and then we have progressions. So you might spend 4 to 6 weeks in each of these movements, and that'll nearly take you through a season, to be honest. And again, we have the same idea for these different movement patterns. So again, I keep saying this, people, I know this is doesn't make any sense. Some people are just coming on as youth coaches, but the main things are these movements up at the top. Again, I'll send this on. If you Google this stuff, it'll come up and you can have your progression schemes in place. Looking back at, the whole chronological age, biological age, and movement age, sometimes you'll have a 17-year-old athlete doing the same stuff as a 12-year-old athlete. And sometimes you'll have a 12-year-old athlete doing the same stuff as a 19 or 20-year-old athlete, based on where their competency is with movements. So, sometimes, and it's kind of happened now, up in Donegal, they've changed the age grades from under 18 to under 17. That decision was made a few weeks ago. So suddenly now you've a couple of 17-year-olds who are now senior players. And, will they go straight into the senior program? For the teams I work with, they won't, because they're not at that level. They'll be doing movements that are appropriate for them of where they're currently at. Likewise, you could have a 13-year-old who's, very competent physically. So oftentimes I see with people from who play other sports, maybe gymnastics and stuff, they've quite good physical literacy. So if they're able to do the progressions, I'll let them do it. And again, it's very athlete based, or where they're currently at. Right, nearly there. So this is a sample training week for a senior club. If we start on the Monday, so this is 1 day post game. Typically for the younger athletes, I would have an upper body day and lower mobility. So they've just had a tough game on a Sunday. I don't really want to load the lower body too much. Sometimes I would if we've no game coming up. But typically, if we're going weekend to weekend with matches, I would have an upper body and a lower mobility. I like that day being physio based if the guys need it. And down here, the RPs, how difficult it is. I like doing RPs out of 10. So this session would be a 4 or 5 out of 10 difficulty. Now, typically, and changes club to club, Tuesdays and Thursdays are your pitch days. Tuesday typically will be a bit more extensive or longer duration movements or longer duration efforts. And then I like doing prehab these days of the hamstring, groin, calf. The main reason I like doing it on a Tuesday is it's still 5 days away from Sunday. So even though we're getting this direct hamstring, groin, calf work, the athletes should still be good for the Sunday match, which ultimately is what you want, is to always maintain an athlete's readiness for performance. So plyometric, GCT is ground contact times. Typically I'll do longer ground contact times on a Tuesday, and then on a Thursday I'll do fast ground contact times. On a Tuesday it's more longer efforts, maybe or longer, maybe within a game context, I'll actually do multiple small-sided games. So it's extensive from the point of view of the frequency in the session. On the Thursday, then it's more game specific. It's more intense. The plyometrics are faster, and then there's a bigger emphasis towards specificity, which is your tactics and your technical situation. So maybe, you know, you're playing a certain team on a Sunday, you'll practice certain kick-out strategies or certain transition strategies. The following week, then you're playing a different team, you play a different style. Maybe that'll change then. The Wednesday session, I like having it whole body. The reason for that, instead of having like another or a lower body or body splits, is oftentimes when you work with teams, the manager might say, we're going to cut an S&C session out. So if you've just done upper, lower, whatever splits, and you don't get a session in that week, then you'll have gone maybe 2 weeks without hitting certain body parts. So maybe, you know, if you just had a lower body session here, and then the following week the manager says, now we're not going to do the Wednesday session, it'll be 2 weeks and detraining will start to happen. I should have said, sorry, this upper body and lower body, I would primarily have it the transition athletes. Older athletes, I sometimes make that an optional session. So oftentimes in season, some athletes might only get one lift in or one dedicated S&C session within the week. Saturday then, so GA don't do this too well of culturally, having a meeting up the day before a game. Some teams do this the morning off a game, and it's just to get a light sweat going, get some movement in. This called a primer day or a potentiation day. This kind of gets the body ready for a match on a Sunday. You know, some schools of thought is going from Thursday to Sunday with doing nothing isn't the best physical preparation. Sometimes athletes can feel a little bit sluggish if they've too big of a gap. So that's just an option for some teams, and it's quite common within other sports like NFL. Okay, last slide. So, you know, I think it's important to, you know, appreciate the different cultures within a team within the club, and you know, our priority with youth athletes is to expose them to a wide variety of skills and physical development and thought processes. I remember having a conversation with a club a few years ago. There's two schools of thought. One is to have this set way of the club should play this way throughout all the teams. So by the time they get to senior, they're kind of indoctrinated in that way and it's seamless. And then the other school of thought was, no, we need variety and variability. I would be in that school of thought of, you know, you need to develop them as holistically as you can. Then when you get to senior level, then you can kind of narrow in on what their strengths and weaknesses are. In terms of having it from a physical point of view, I'm big on supporting the supports. So you have all these youth coaches, often who are parents and are volunteers, and it's quite a daunting aspect to go out and train a team. And then to be asked to do some physical development is even more daunting. So I think for maybe development officers in clubs that, you know, we can put in these little structures. Maybe it's microdosing, maybe it's a really simplistic home session based on fundamental movements that the support systems, the coaches can feel competent in giving out to their athletes and feel like they're doing a good service to their athletes. Microdosing is a very effective tool for any age group. I talked about it for strength work for youth athletes. For senior athletes as well, it's very effective for doing sprint-based training or some plyometric movements. So yeah, it's microdosing is essentially just small exposures done frequently. Lastly, then, you know, this thing about projects, often working with, you know, say athletes, especially maybe higher level athletes, it can be really challenging to introduce new ideas, new approaches. They'll often ask why, or, this, we normally do it this way, we've never done it that way. And so your ability to be adaptable is quite small. I was at a talk a few years ago. There was a guy, David Martin. He's the head of Philadelphia 76ers. He's the head of performance. And he brought it up about introducing these projects. So what he'd do is tell the athletes, listen, we're going to try this nutritional intervention for 3 weeks, or we're going to try this warm up for 3 weeks. We're going to try this way of training for 3 weeks. We're going to try this new way of kickouts for 3 weeks. And if it doesn't work, we'll just get rid of it. And if it does work, great, we'll keep it. And because of that, then throughout the season, they could introduce lots of these little interventions. Some didn't work, some did work. But it got rid of this whole thing of, having to be 100% certain that like a new nutritional strategy will work, or 100% certain that a kickout strategy will work, because sport is so multidimensional. Like, looking at that whole technical tactical model, there's so many facets to it that you cannot be 100% sure on anything. Any coach that says they are needs to probably have a look at themselves. There's a lot of, guesswork within sports performance. And at least this way, then you're testing the waters, and you're not going to lose face if it doesn't work, because you've categorized it as a project, and then you can pull it out. So yeah, that's just something I found has helped me throughout the years as a coach. Okay, I think Brian's going to come back on here. We're going to do some questions, maybe, if there is any.
Thanks, Declan.
Yeah.
Great presentation. Just a couple that came here on the chat. I think Oisin might have a couple as well. Just what's the idea behind choosing full body sessions rather than, say, a specific push / push or pull day? That was a question.
Yeah. So again, if you have a full body day on a Monday, and then, say you had a push pull on a Monday, and then you had a lower body on a Wednesday, and the manager pulls the session on a Wednesday, then it'll be 2 weeks before you can hit lower body again. That's one element. The other element is maybe sometimes the Tuesday pitch session is really, really hard. So when the athletes come in on a Wednesday to do a gym session, they're buggered essentially, and you're not going to get a lot out of them. Whereas if you have a total body session done earlier in the week, you're not in too bad of a position then. So it's just kind of covering your bases for the how changeable sports is.
Obviously now, what advice would you give post-lockdown? So hopefully within the next couple of weeks or whatever it is going to be, moving from maybe individual practice into training again. So what advice do you have on that? And obviously we know the injury risks that come with that.
I think two things. One is, two things that'll decide things will be, when will athletes be allowed back to train, and how long until a performance from when they're allowed back to train to when the performance is. So if you're given 2 weeks and then there's matches, that's very different than if you're given 6 or 8 weeks. Now, I feel it's going to be quite a condensed season. So you're going to have to hit the ground running when you do get back into collective training. So in order for that to happen, then you want athletes to be ready to perform, essentially ready to train. So I would stay away from lockdown 1. There's a lot of 5K kind of stuff going on. I'd stay away from that. If it's Gaelic Games, I would do accelerations, I would do speed work, I would do change of direction work from cones to cones. So you're mitigating the risk once you do go back into training that you have been doing sprints, doing decelerations, doing accelerations, doing lateral changes of direction. So you can do more game-based training. Yes, and again, I'd imagine managers will not have had eyes on players for a good while, so they will want to do a lot of game-based training. So it's up to the athlete to be ready to do that, or earn the right to do that.
Another one that came in, there's no specific rest day, complete rest day, I suppose. Now, I know you had one, I think, on the Saturday.
Yeah.
Or would that be
Let's
kind
go
of
back to
considered the rest day, or say, sorry, on the Friday? Or
yeah.
no, you said some of the parts were optional.
Yeah. So there's probably a few ways to look at this. So the Friday session or Friday could just be family time. That's complete off day. Most athletes don't do a Saturday session, if we're being honest. And it's not a session; it's a primer. It's like 15 minutes. Again, that doesn't really happen. 15 minutes isn't going to negatively. Now, you can do a lot of wrong stuff in 15 minutes, but if you keep the volume low, if you see I kept the RPE quite low that day, so it should be a 3 out of 10 session. So a couple of low volume jumps, a couple of med ball throws, just keep it short. And then the Monday as well, again, some of the older athletes mightn't do anything that day, so they're probably getting maybe 3 days. This training week is kind of based off a high-low system. So if we look at the Tuesday, Thursday, it's the RPEs are quite high. And then the Friday session is quite low. The day before is quite low. The Wednesday session is probably like a medium kind of session. So high stress day on the Tuesday, kind of sometimes Wednesday might be high stress or medium stress. Thursday's quite high stress, and then it's lighter days then. So that's the thinking around that. Just last thing on that, sorry, within the rest days, so there's multiple different qualities being trained throughout the week. So even if the body's not resting, certain qualities are getting maybe one exposure. They're getting rested in certain ways, if that makes sense.
What are the benefits with longer GCT plyos compared to the shorter GCTs?
Yeah, so if we look at that force velocity profile, some athletes are very speed orientated and some are very force orientated. So if we think of the really fast guy and the really slow, strong guy, sometimes athletes, it's good to expose them to different velocities of plyometrics. So a longer ground contact time is less tendons are used. The muscle itself is used a little bit more. They're on the ground a little bit longer. So they kind of generate force a little bit more from their body. Whereas the fast ground contact times, it's more elastic or tendon-esque. And that's kind of stored energy. So to give examples, a fast ground contact time would be being on a box, jumping off a box, jumping onto a box really fast. Whereas the same movement, you could do it that you jump off a box, stick the landing, and then jump back onto the box. Essentially, they're training the body differently. And if we want to expose athletes to a wide variety of stimulus, then it's nice to have both. Also, with sports, everything is very fast anyway, like going up, contesting the ball, hitting the ground, going. So I do like contrasting that with sometimes longer ground contact times.
Perfect, Declan. Yeah, another question yet. The recording, we will try and get it up as soon as we can. I'll get the slides off you, Declan, probably, and we'll be able to share them out via email also in the future. Yeah. Guys, that is it for today's Fingallians webinar. Keep an eye out on Fingallians coaching Twitter account and the Fingallians social media accounts for the next webinar. Thanks again to Declan. Fantastic stuff there that can be used, and really insightful stuff. What was it? Don't forget to give Declan a follow on his social media on Facebook, Declan Gallagher, Strength and Conditioning Coach, and on his Instagram, Declan_Gallagher_coach. Thanks for all your attendance. Hope you're keeping well, and good evening. Slán.